Law school final exams, the toughest part of every semester, and for a lot of law schools, your final exams are 100% of your grade. So everything you've been putting in these last 4 months, long nights and weekends and time away from family and friends, boils down to this one test. So we want to make sure that we are doing everything we can to put ourselves in the best possible position to feel calm and confident and in control when we walk into that final exam room. So that's what we're going to walk through in today's video, is the system and the framework that I teach my students inside of my Signature 1L coaching program, so that you guys can absolutely go in and crush these final exams. Step one is to make a final exam study calendar. And this is so crazy important because the amount of time between the last day of class and your first final exam is minimal. I know that for a lot of us, we think, well, if we've spent the last 4 months learning all of this material, for sure they're going to give us time to study it. And that is just not the case. You are probably going to have about 3 to 4 exam study days per doctrinal exam. And that's going to be the maximum that I see in a lot of my students' schedules. And that's okay. We'll take it, we'll use it, but we just want to be really intentional about siphoning off those days, because those days in particular are going to be the most powerful for what we're going to do. The other thing that we want to really make sure we're doing is dividing out those days so that they don't clump together, meaning we're not just studying 3 to 4 days before every single final. Most of us can't do that because of the way that our final exams are allocated. But more importantly, we want to make sure that we are capitalizing on the beginning of that final exam study period equally for all of our exams. Because what tends to happen is that final exam period is about 2 to 3 weeks long, and it is exhausting. Your brain is going to get more and more fatigued as you make your way through that 2 to 3 week period. And so what we want to do is make sure that we're giving equal love and attention to all of our doctrinal classes when our brain is the freshest, the strongest, we have the most energy and the most motivation. And what tends to happen is that if we're not really intentional about how we're allocating study days for each of our final exams at the beginning of that study period, we're going to default into just studying for whatever exam is first on the list. And so that exam is going to get so much more of our mental energy and attention. And the ones that come after it are going to be totally neglected, and they're going to get whatever time is left. So we want to avoid that trap and be really, really specific in allocating those 3 to 4 final exam study days per final exam in alternating order, starting at the beginning of the final exam period. Step 2, now that we have our final exam calendar in place, the next step is to finish our outlines. Now, the deadline by which we want to do this will be literally the day before we start our designated final exam study period. And how realistic that is will depend on how early in the semester you started your outlines, how consistent you were week to week in getting them done and making progress on them. So if you are at all wondering about or curious about the outlining process, definitely check out this video here where I walk through the process of how to build out those outlines. But if you're finding yourself in triage mode where this is just not feeling possible, then you definitely can use a 2L or 3L outline as a base or foundation to fill in the gaps that you don't have time to fill in with your own outline. It will always be more powerful for you to build them out from zero. But again, we need to get through this outlining process so we can move on to the next step. So as you're finishing up your outlines, whether that's you creating them from your reading notes and class notes or using a 2L or 3L outline, or a mixture of both, one thing to keep in mind is that we're no longer prioritizing reading for class. We are doing literally everything we can to limit the amount of time that we're reading / not read at all, whether that's using Quimby, whether that's using somebody else's 2L or 3L outline before you get into class, whether that's fumbling your way through cold calls. All of the above, reading is no longer the priority once we have shifted our focus to getting prepared for final exams and finishing these outlines so we can move on to the next step. Step 3, studying for final exams. And the million-dollar question is, how do we actually study for a law school final exam? Because in college, studying kind of looked like rereading the textbook and maybe creating flashcards and staying up till 2 a.m. sort of quizzing each other back and forth. And in law school, it's going to look different because the style of the final exam is different. And so yes, there are an unlimited number of ways you could potentially study for final exams in law school, but my absolute favorite way is creating what are called canned answers. So let's talk about them. So canned answers you may have heard referred to as pre-writes or rule statements, and essentially what we're doing is we're taking our outline and we're condensing and organizing it one more time. And when we do that, what we're highlighting are the important rule statements, the situation-specific rules, the factor analyses, and the case facts. So all of these little pieces that we can actually use to form arguments on the day of the exam. And what I see a lot of law students doing in place of a creation step like that is rereading and rereading and rereading the outline that they've already created. And there's a big difference between a creation step that really helps you internalize the information and a passive learning step like rereading a document you've already created. Another benefit to creating a document like canned answers rather than just rereading what you've created in your outline is that you are also organizing and formatting the information in an extremely accessible way. Because when it comes to law school final exams, it's not just about knowing the law, it's not just about understanding the material, it's also about identifying and getting those arguments on the page as quickly as possible. And so when we're talking about creating a document like canned answers, we are making sure that we can visually access that information as quickly as possible. And so one of the questions that I get a lot from people is, well, I have a closed book exam. Are canned answers still a good idea? And unequivocally, my answer is yes, because A, you're still getting that intentional creation organization step, but B, when you create those canned answers in a really accessible format, you're going to be able to reference points and arguments and material that you've learned throughout the semester in a really effective way rather than trying to review sort of an 80 or 100 page document. And so that's still going to serve you when you are doing your last minute studying up until the day of the final exam. Step 4, practice exams. And this is a really powerful piece to the puzzle because when we talk about reading for class and taking class notes and creating outlines and building out these canned answers, we're talking about internalizing the material, which yes, is really important. You need to know the law in order to do well on final exams. But knowing the law is not the end of the game because what I see from a lot of law students is they'll come to me saying, I really felt like I knew the law and I didn't get the grade that I felt like should have been reflected on a final exam. And that gap between knowing the law and getting the grade that you're really excited about comes down to being able to write a really compelling final exam answer. And that is not something natural that we can just do. We have to practice. And so when we are building out these practice problems, we are practicing writing in the IRAC format. We're practicing spotting issues. We're practicing using those legal rules that we've learned to combine with facts to make these really compelling arguments. And we're practicing doing it in a really confined time frame because when you get comfortable enough to actually set a timer, 30, 60, 90 minutes, depending on the practice problem that you're doing, then you start to really up-level your exam answer. And not only are you writing out legal arguments, but you're doing it and making those decisions within a really compact time frame because when we are limited on time, that's when we really have to start making these judgment calls about which issues am I going to actually build out an IRAC for? Which issues am I going to use a smoosh analysis for? Which issues am I going to wait and tackle until the very end? And which ones am I going to prioritize? And so all of those nuances and all of those sort of inherent calls that we're making in real time, that only thing that forces you to do that is this time pressure. And so all of those little pieces working together is what makes you a really strong final exam writer. And the absolute best way to get better at that skill is to practice. Step 5, professor office hours. Now, I know this step is the one I get the most resistance from my students around because it's intimidating to go into professor office hours and they seem really knowledgeable and they seem really smart and they know all the things and they've been teaching this for 20 years. And I remember my first semester, I never went into professor office hours because I didn't even feel like I knew the information well enough to ask a question. But if you can stomach it, then I absolutely recommend implementing this step because one, we want to get the answers to our substantive questions, right? So if there's anything that you guys have learned throughout the semester that is not clicking, that doesn't make sense, going into your professor office hours can really help because professors tend to explain a concept a lot more clearly one-on-one than they might do in a larger lecture setting. But way more important than that is we want to get intel and reconnaissance from your professors on how they like their final exam answers written. Because the reality is that, yeah, most law school professors really like the IRAC formula. Issue, rule, analysis, conclusion, that's a great starting point. But inevitably, every professor has some tweaks or personalizations or preferences that if we can find out what those are, we can make up those extra points on a final exam. And so a lot of professors are not going to be forthcoming with this information. You're going to have to ask them directly because they tend to play their cards really close to the vest. And so some questions that you can ask when you walk into professor office hours after going through your substantive questions are things like, do you like the Iraq formula when we are writing out final exam answers? Do you prefer or have a preference with when and where we allocate the conclusion in our answer? Do you have any strong feelings about the argument counter-argument structure? Is there anything in particular that you like about bringing in the cases when we're using our analysis? So anything that you can use to kind of dig in a little bit about what it is they'd like to see. And of course, if they have past exams or past exams with model answers or A answers, those are going to be the gold standard. We absolutely want to dig into those because that's them telling us what they have actually allocated an A to, what they actually like to see in written form. And so anything like that we can get our hands on is incredibly, incredibly valuable so that we can write our final exam answers to the audience that's actually going to be giving us the grade at the end of the day. All right, guys, I hope that gave you some clarity and some structure around your own final exam preparation process. And if you're just really in it right now and could use a boost of motivation and good vibes, then definitely check out our free Law School Network Facebook group. It's filled with over 3,000 people going through the exact same process as you. And it's a really great place to be heard and just get some good vibes, motivation, and confidence. So I hope to see you guys in there, and best of luck on your final exams.